Kenmore City Council is now in session. I'm going to turn things over to our facilitator for today's retreat, Michael Pendleton. Michael.
Thank you. And thank all of you for giving up your evening once again. Tonight we have about 4 hours to cover a lot of material. That's not new in our retreats together, but right away it prompts me to ask for your help in terms of the efficiency of our discussions and so on. I'm very mindful that we have 3 new council members. First time for me to be with you in this setting, and we have had an opportunity to talk one-on-one prior to, so which was great. I'd like to, though, quickly go over the ground rules. Many of the folks that are in the room are familiar with these, but I'd like to do that one more time and just kind of tee it up so we can get underway with the agenda. You've heard me say this many times. I'm very fond of the first one, which is empower the facilitator. But in order for me to do my job and help you do yours, I'll ask you to follow these ground rules, and a couple of them are very specific. Many of them are obvious. I don't need to go through some of these. The one I would stop at is seek facilitator acknowledgement for speaking, which many were practiced at, but it may be new to some. And initially that may seem a little clunky, but it actually causes us to move pretty quickly. And I'll apologize in advance if I miss your hand, and if somebody sees somebody I've missed, don't hesitate to say, Michael, this person, or what have you. So that has worked. Share airtime, and one conversation at a time and all that. We know those distracting things are hard on us. One of the most powerful things you can do in life, I would say, is listen to other people. And so it's, as it says on here, it's a sign of respect. So I always remind myself to try to do more of that, actually. We can self-facilitate. Please, if you hear yourself saying the same thing twice, it's time to move on. I will be listening for that. And since you brought me in to do that, I'll try to help create some efficiencies with you and all of us in that regard. And finally, seek some positive outcomes and so on. I could say unequivocally, certainly with this team, but over the years, this council has been very productive in their retreats. The agendas on the larger retreats are mammoth. I've said this many times. There's very few groups I'd take through an agenda like that in the time frame. And one of the reasons we can do that, there's really 2 major ones, is you do help in the facilitating process. So I'm asking for that tonight. And you're studied. You tend to do your homework and understand the issues. But that said, with new folks on board, learning curve steep. So all of us will need to be patient and supportive of information that you need to do your job as new council members. So with that, I'd turn it over to Rob and to start in on the first meaty item of our agenda.
Thanks, Michael. So in your packets and also on the online packet, you have what we affectionately call visual work plans. They're these brightly colored plans. They're color coded by light workload, heavy workload, medium workload. And I call them visual work plans because you can see at a glance a department's work plan and how it unfolds throughout the year. But what I'd like to do is turn the time over to each department head to just briefly kind of go over some highlights of their 2024 work plans. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie in the city manager's office to go first.
All right, well, thank you so much. So in summary, the city manager's office, we lead and support citywide projects and initiatives. And a lot of those are core functions of democracy and being a well-run city. And the team members, they offer support across the organization on initiatives in other departments as well. And just a really talented, experienced team that provides really important work across the whole organization. So there's a lot to the city manager's office work plan, and I won't go into, there's a lot of details to it, but they're in categories. And so the first category, city clerk, records, executive leadership issues. There's a lot to this, projects, different committees, and support to the council, things like our diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility effort, and then also leadership of the organization. We have ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act, so continuing to implement those projects that council approved earlier. We have communications, so the Love Where You Live project falls under that. Things like the website, ongoing projects and communications for all efforts across the city, daily, weekly work and support of that effort. We have economic development, so things like the Kenmore Business Alliance and the Chamber of Commerce. Lake Point, Love Where You Live also falls under economic development and of outreach that we're doing to businesses. And then special projects like the business registration expansion, a lodging tax, things like that. We have housing and human services, serving our most vulnerable populations and housing projects, and then human services efforts and contracts, as well as the needs assessment, and then lots of partnerships and coalitions and organizations that we support. There's public safety. So the sheriff's office contract, regional crisis response, things like 24/7 crisis center, and working with our justice system, like our courts, judges, prosecutor, public defender, community court. And then there are other regional partnerships and special projects that the city manager's office undertakes.
Any questions on city manager's office? Then let's go to community development.
Good evening, everybody. So in community development, our focus is on the future, long-range planning and also park planning. So you will see on the work plan that a lot of focus for this year is on the comprehensive plan and development regulations. The comprehensive plan is part of the Planning Commission docket, which council approved a couple of meetings ago. We are mandated by the state to have a comprehensive plan, and by the end of 2024, we have to have the whole comprehensive plan updated, and we've been doing that periodically, but you can see on the work plan that there are several elements of the comprehensive plan that will be on the Planning Commission docket this year. In addition, we have quite a few implementing development regulations on the docket, which largely support implementation of middle housing based on state law that was passed last year, and also the accessory dwelling unit state law that was passed last year, and some additional things like cottage housing or small houses on small lots. So this is a pretty aggressive work program in terms of comprehensive plan and development regulation implementation for this year. What we also do is we also kind of assist with policy and strategy development. That's the next kind of category down there. So most recently working on the aquatic center feasibility study. We're going to be working on some public art policy and bringing that forward this year. The next category down is park capital projects or other kind of sort of related projects to parks. So park capital projects are those which are included on the 6-year capital improvement program, and those have a number assigned to them. So you can see that the first 4 listed there are park capital projects, and the ones that are lower down there are more planning related, or like I say, a little bit off the cuff, like for example, the lease for Log Boom Park Pier. Other than that, then you can kind of see that following that, it's either other work program items, emergency management also falls under community development, and then any grants that the city has related to the work that we're doing. There's also a component of grant management or grant application. And then also down there, we also participate on regional bodies as well, including ARCH. Questions?
No questions? Fine.
Let's go to development services.
Okay, so development services work plan is separated into daily workload and special projects. So those are development proposals that are public and private, as well as a few code updates and then special projects. Development Services handles all the land use and permit applications with a few exceptions. And our goal is really to help serve the residents of Kenmore, including builders, business owners, property owners, and tenants. And what we do, how we do that is providing really good services, so predictable permitting, plan review, and permit issuance. And so that's our focus for 2024 is to improve our customer service and overall processes to continue providing accessible services that are predictable. And the daily workload takes up the bulk of our work plan, which is processing and issuing permits. Development Services also includes code enforcement. We have one code enforcement officer, and she responds to nuisances and other code-related violations or potential violations. On the work plan for private projects, a few are listed that are larger or time-consuming projects. One most notably is 25 Degrees condominiums right across from City Hall. That's been a large project, and we're getting close to issuing the second building permit for that. Public projects also are required to get permits. So Kenmore Elementary modernization has been pretty time consuming, and we know the Inglemore High School master plan is upcoming, as well as a few others that are listed here. Development Services does some code updates, although most of them go through community development. There are a few smaller code updates that we do. And then there's, of course, trees is a larger code update that we continue to work on. So we'll continue that this year. Not included in here is there's a bill 5290 for permit processing timelines. So we'll have to do an update for that to comply with updated permit timeline requirements from the state. Other than that, special projects really focuses on improving our permit system, including our online permit system, so that we can manage permits and inspections more efficiently.
Any questions, Joe?
What is the household size anticipated to involve?
That's an update from the state. So it's been on our list for a year or so. And that's just saying that the state used to put a particular number on how many would be considered a household. And that has since gone away, and we just need to update our code to be consistent. So we still have to follow what the state says now, but our code, most of these are updating to comply with state requirements.
Other questions or comments? Okay.
Let's go to Public Works and Engineering.
Good evening. My department, engineering, deals primarily with the safe and efficient operation of our right-of-way. So we're primarily responsible for making sure everything is safe, and we decide what kind of help what gets built into the right-of-way. So I've got traffic engineering, I've got transportation capital projects, transportation planning, and utility permitting, right-of-way management. Right now, this year we're looking at updating our pavement ratings for all of our streets in Kenmore. We also get a ton of service requests for traffic engineering. We're working on the annual traffic counts program. That's a yearly program that we have that looks at the speed and volume of our roads in Kenmore. We cycle in each street every few years. Also, we look at crash data analysis. So we evaluate the crashes that occur in Kenmore and decide whether we need to do something to mediate that or mitigate that. We're also responsible for the photo enforcement program that we have out there. Within transportation planning, we're also going to be looking at what are other alternative modes of transportation we could have within Kenmore. We're also do the transportation improvement plan, which looks at our projected projects planned in the next 6 years. Also looking at the pedestrian facilities plan, keeping that up to date. Look at that about every 2 years. And then, of course, keeping an eye on our Title 12 and 10 of the municipal code to make sure it's up to date. Also responsible for the ADA transition plan as part of transportation planning. And then we've got all of the utility permitting, including franchise agreements with utilities, that falls within my group. And then we also do right-of-way code compliance, making sure that everyone is meeting with our code. And then finally, the transportation capital program. We've got several projects that are starting up this year. Most of them were recently received grant funds. So we've got the 80th Avenue sidewalks, the Arrowhead sidewalk project. We've got Lower Swamp Creek Bridge replacement over on 175th. We have the 190th Street sidewalk replacement, 192nd sidewalks, and then the 181st sidewalks going in. And then we're going to be finishing, we're working on 61st replacement. We're hopefully going to have 30% on that soon and finishing a few other projects. Your work plan here is missing a few projects for some reason, so I've been rattling off all of them. And then we're going to be working on a ADA trail connection to the Brookhaven Trail at 61st. So that's pretty much what we're doing.
If I can add to that, excuse me. So if you look at his work plan for capital, you see the color coding, and blue is for construction, and we actually don't see a lot of blue in 2024. And John, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so we had a big flurry of construction, and now we're starting in design, and design takes a while. So 2024 and 2025 are going to be primarily design, and then we'll start construction in 2026. We have the 170th interim sidewalk we're hoping to get in this year, but for the most part, all of our projects are probably going to be in 2026. And a lot of that has to do with just, it takes a while now to build a project, and some of these have permit requirements that will take a while to meet, so.
Any questions, comments? Okay. Next.
On to Public Works, Environmental Services.
All right, thank you. So, yes, I'm Richard Sawyer with Environmental Services, and the work plan for environmental services in front of you. You can see we kind of fall into a few major categories. We manage the city's stormwater utility, as well as just general management of surface waters around the city. We also implement the city's climate action plan, and then also manage the city's surface water capital improvement program. So starting with some just kind of a overview of managing the stormwater utility, a lot of the work that we conduct is mandated under the state's NPDES permit. And I've tried the best I can. When you go through in bold, you can see kind of the main programs. I'll indicate which programs are typically mandated under the permit. And these can be a variety of tasks, everything from education and outreach, which we conduct year round at city events. We do a lot of inspection and work order management of the city's surface water facilities, and that's both public and private. So we work a lot with Jennifer's team, as well as a lot of the private businesses around the city. We work quite a bit with Samantha's team in development services. We help with when we're taking on new facilities being constructed and private development and public development, and getting those transitioned over for my team to kind of inspect and manage work orders ongoing after that. We even get involved with planning. So a lot of different stormwater planning activities and keeping codes and regulations updated required by both the permit as well as the city's long-range planning. For instance, in this work plan, you'll see that we're actually doing an update of the city's surface water element. So we'll be working with Debbie's team on that, as well as soon as that wraps up, we'll be jumping and updating this surface water master plan, which is kind of the implementation part of the surface water element. And then a lot of that is permit driven, and then just kind of more general surface water management. We implement the city's aquatic vegetation management plan. So I'll actually be coming to council later in February to talk about what our plan will be for this year. So you'll hear more at that meeting. And we do stream monitoring, some permit regulated, some of that is our own monitoring at various streams around the city, as well as summertime beach monitoring for swimming conditions at some of our parks, which has expanded as we've done park improvements over the last couple of years. So summer's a really busy inspection season. So that's kind of the MPDS and surface water side. Into the capital side, the city updated the surface water CIP last fall and to a pretty aggressive CIP over the next several years. So we are actually currently advertising for a capital project manager that's going to help oversee those projects. And as John mentioned, it can take a couple years just to get going on those. So hopefully we'll start putting those in the ground in 2026 per our CIP that was adopted in fall. And again, I didn't list all those out. This is just specifically what we're working on this year in 2024, but that list will be getting longer and longer each year. And climate action, again, we actually just presented our climate action work program for 24 in fall to council, and glad to say we're underway with that. We've applied for some of those grants that we mentioned, and working on updating the greenhouse gas inventory, and some of those programs that you see listed underneath the climate action plan there are all underway. And we are actually also been interviewing members of the community for the Climate Action Advisory Committee. So we're about 75% of the way through candidates and getting a lot of great applicants. So hopefully we'll be wrapping that up in a couple weeks and sharing that with you in the near future. And I think that is my time, so.
Richard, you mentioned you'll be updating the surface water master plan this year. Can you talk about where's the fun?
As a part of that, I came to Rob and asked if I think it'd be a good opportunity as kind of a outreach and fun activity to, we've got a lot of unnamed tributaries in the city. So working with the community and perhaps getting some names suitable for some of these streams so that we're not just throwing numbers around. I
Yeah,
think
like,
Swamp is staying though.
yeah, we have to stay with Swamp Creek because it's a regional creek, but there's Muck Creek is fully contained within our city, and I think that needs a different name. And my favorite is the stream right in my backyard. It's called 0222. So I think it needs a much better name than that.
Deborah?
Just wondering if any of them might have, and I noticed Suzanne in the audience, historic or indigenous names might be something to think about too.
That's what, yeah, hopefully we'll find out, work with the community.
Other questions or comments? Okay.
Okay, next in the packet is finance and administration.
Good evening, Council. Melinda Moreau, Finance Director, and under the 2024 work plan, at the top I have our ongoing regular work that my department does. Obviously, a lot of time is spent with payroll and benefits. Everybody wants to make sure they get paid on time and the right amount. So so far, no complaints. So that's been going well. And then, of course, financial accounting, reporting, reconciliations, huge part of the work that we do on a daily, monthly, annual basis. Cash and investment management. Then some reporting with payroll and other federal, state, W-2s, 1099s, those types of things. We handle all the invoices, payments, accounts receivable, anything with grants. We help the other team members track what's happening. Reports that come to you each month or as they're ready. There's some IT liaison work. We have a contract for our IT services with Lighthouse. So one of my team is the liaison for the city, and he assists with sometimes internal requests from people as he's able. And then when he's not, it's a service request to the Lighthouse. So that takes some of our time. There's an IT advisory committee, an investment advisory committee, wellness committee. And then there's also another committee that my team is on. So a lot of committee work happening. Of course, preparing for the council meetings, staying on top of internal controls and our processes. And the DEI work is really important. So I'm trying to make those changes. So then on to some more project type work. We obviously handle the annual report for the state auditor's office, which they're in the middle of auditing right now. And we also have a couple other reports that we do. There's a parks levy annual report that is due, I think, in May. Well, he has it on here. Yep, 5/31. So some random things related to audits and reporting that's happening. Of course, the big thing going on right now is the FSP, Financial Sustainability Plan, doing a lot of work for me and Carla, who's assisting now in her new position with budget. We are really trying to dig in and understand what's going on, since I'm about to hit a year now with the city, and just really trying to make sure that I'm helping the committee with as much background information as possible. So that's obviously taking a lot of time. This year is going to be the biannual budget preparation. So I'm excited to work on that, and that will affect all of the other directors here and their teams, as we all have to gather our information and do those updates. So I'm looking forward to that. CIP management last year was really heavy, a lot of learning for me in that area, but helping get that information to council. And I will just say, coming in new, that the folks here that work on the CIP, John and Richard and Jennifer and Debbie, all do amazing work to make it easy for me. So that was a pleasure to get to know them through that. Property tax, that happens in November. And I mentioned IT already. Risk management is another area that falls under me. So making sure that we're staying on top of our payments that we need to make and claims that are coming through, and when the attorney gets involved. The Public Works Operations Center financing is coming up, so there'll be work related to that this year. And CAP and Human Services funding, monitoring the expenses along with the new revenue sources that we are collecting. Questions?
Valerie.
Thank you so much, Melinda. We had the opportunity as new council members to meet with you last week, and I just want to clarify for the larger group that the delay in the audit being filed is agency delay, not city delay.
Absolutely, yeah. We have to file it by May 31st, which was for 2022, was done last May 31st, and the audit's still happening. So the auditors, due to staffing issues and one of the things is all the money that has come through federal funding like ARPA has overtaxed the people that they have. And so it took them really long to get the federal audits done, which put behind the state audits. And so we're still waiting to get that finalized. In the meantime, we're working on our 2023 report. So yeah, it's totally waiting on the state auditor's office.
All right, that was a nice little detour away from Public Works. So let's go back to Public Works. Operations.
Thanks, Rob. Jennifer Gordon, the Public Works Operations Director. And I'm gonna talk about Public Works Operations Department. We do the day-to-day operations, taking care of the Kenmore's public facilities and different infrastructure. That includes parks, facilities and fleet, streets and surface water maintenance, events and volunteer programs, and recreation programs. We perform this work with a variety of in-house staff, contracts with private vendors and contractors, and interlocal agreements with other government agencies. We provide 24/7 around-the-clock service to the community. We have a crew that's on call, so there's somebody that's on call every day. So we are ready to support emergencies or any things that come up after hours. We also work very closely with the engineering department, environmental services, community development with capital improvement projects, and that includes before the projects, planning during the projects, and then, of course, at the end of the projects when they're transitioning into maintenance. Some of the highlights for this year are, the biggest highlight is really getting the Public Works Operations Center design underway. We'll be hiring a limited term public or project manager for the Public Works Operations Center. It's actually just posted today, so hoping to get somebody on board to help us just keep that project moving along. We hope to be finished by the end of the year with design and go into construction during 2025. And as far as the actual spreadsheet's concerned, I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. It's all pretty standard stuff that kind of happens every year. It's divided up by the different kind of divisions of the Public Works Operations Department. And just one of the other highlights happening this year is the facility reservations software that we're going to be implementing in a few months is going to be a one-stop shop for all of the reservations in the city that include City Hall, the hangar, and all of our parks facilities and picnic shelters that we have. So kind of right now it's kind of scattered all about, so it'll be all in one place that everybody can go to. So excited about that.
And all of our picnic shelters will be reservable,
Yes,
including Morelands and all the others.
and we'll be bringing that policy in front of you in a couple months.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Let's turn it over to Stephanie to cover police.
Thank you so much. Brandon couldn't be here with us tonight, so I'm happy to cover this. The 2024 work plan for police includes there's all the positions. So you can see we have a police chief, and then patrol, investigations, which is our detective, crime prevention programs, including block watch presentations, business consultations, and then home and business security checks, automated photo enforcement, school outreach efforts, which that includes Lunch with a Cop, which is a highly popular program, a reading program, and drug presentations, marine services, and then community giveaways, prescription drop box, interdepartmental trainings, including body-worn camera implementation, which is planned for this year, the regional crisis response program. Brandon serves on the operations board for that organization, that entity, DEIA strategic implementation, community court support, and community outreach, including social media management throughout the year, and prep for nurturing trust workshops. And I will say, if you haven't checked out the Kenmore Police Department's Facebook page lately, you should, because the group does a really nice job. The team does a really nice job keeping up-to-date information on there for the community's benefit.
If I could just add on the nurturing trust workshops, that's been done by the city of Shoreline, and we've been wanting to implement it, but it got interrupted by the pandemic, and then we've had resource issues. But it really, the concept of nurturing trust workshops is it works with youth and their families in the Hispanic communities, and tries to create a bond and a connection with law enforcement and that community. So it's seen a lot of success in Shoreline, and Chief saw that back when he was in Shoreline. So we've always been wanting to do the same program here.
And I'll just add one more thing is that we're planning on April 22nd, a public safety study session like we've done in the past. So you'll get the full report from Brandon and our other partners then.
Questions, discussion? Okay. Planning Commission?
The 2024 Planning Commission docket is just there for your reference. You already adopted it earlier this month, but we just wanted to have it as context. And as I did mention that night, it's a very ambitious docket. So we'll be checking in throughout the year to see how we're doing. No pressure, Debbie.
Okay, so there's the overview of the 24 work plan. I don't know if you notice any themes in it, but one of the things I noticed as the person that watches from afar, it seems to be lacking a lot of capital projects. Is that I mean, they're there, but you're not on the ground building them, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Like I said, we had a really big construction season last couple of years and giving everybody a break.
Right. That's something that always gets noticed in a community without a doubt. So anything else that yeah, Rob?
I just, so Melinda went over it quickly. She did emphasize it, but the preparing of the biennium budget is an all hands on deck exercise. And it's a big effort. It's a big lift. It's a big document that we produce. And so when once we have your 2-day retreat a little bit later this year, then that gives us the guidance we need to launch into the budget process. And we plan on having some community engagement with that, of course. And so that is a big workload item. Speaking of your next retreat, this is just a little mini retreat to talk about how the year's going to go and how you're going to work together. But we would like to nail down a date for the 2-day retreat. And we need Councilmember Culver here. He's running a little bit late and he'll come a little bit later. So when he gets here, I would like to see if we can all nail down the date for the 2-day retreat. And we're looking at April 26th, 27th, or that next weekend. Is that like May 3rd, 4th, something like that? So those are the kind of the 2 weekends we're zeroing in on.
Okay. Any comments or questions before we move on? So this relatively small gathering in terms of time is, I think, at least the way I look at it, is you're starting to cast your eye forward throughout the year. You're certainly convening a new policy team with new members. I think that the next phase of our discussions tonight is an investment in you as a policy team. Policy teams, elected city councils are very different than other type of teams in many ways, but one of the most fundamental ways that you're different than a lot of the other teams that you may belong to, so on. You're elected independently, so you're expected to come with an independent point of view. That may be a statement of the obvious right up until you realize that you need to work together to actually pass policies and do a number of things. And this work plan begins to punctuate the complexity of the work that's certainly in front of your staff, but will come to you in one way or another. The learning curve steep. And so the rest of our discussions this evening, I see at least, is an investment in you as a policy team, so that you can certainly sustain that level of independence and intellectual honesty that you all bring, and yet work together in a way that's efficient. What's that mean? I think if someone said, what's the number one thing, Michael, that makes policy bodies efficient is they reduce the social noise. So they enable yourself to be different, work together in such a way so that you don't get sidetracked in unproductive energies and interactions and all that we know plagues the human condition. So I'm hoping that tonight is an investment in the beginning of the 24 policy team, and that's certainly how I look at it, and that's my hope for you in terms of the outcome. That said, I guess I'd turn to all of you and say, as you look forward to 2024, as the agenda says, there's a question there for you. And that question is, what are your hopes for this city, for this body, and in any area for 2024? What are you looking forward to? If 2024 was enormously successful from your perspective, what would that look like? And having some thought about that. So it's coming to you, council members, as a question, and then I'm hoping a discussion. So with that, I would turn it to you and say, what are your thoughts about that? Anyone? Nigel.
I mean, a really successful 2024 would be actual movement on Lake Point. Like actual movement on Lake Point.
And that's certainly been a topic, potential project, an area of your city for years. So it's okay. Any comment on that? Thoughts? Okay.
I just put a piece
Right,
of fruit
I'll-
in my mouth. Apologies.
Yeah, Melanie.
But I just want to echo the mayor's sentiment about making headway on Lake Point in some way, shape, or form. And I think we have a lot of opportunity now. So, and I think we may have a council that has the will to help carry this through. So I'm excited about that.
That would be exciting.
And I think along with that is, in order to move forward with that, is working with our community in a way that, brings us together behind something that really connects and can help drive the future for Kenmore economic development and environmentally. So I think we've got some really great opportunity there. Thank you.
Okay.
If I can just add something on
Please.
Lake Point, yeah. So, to be kind of proactive on that and anticipate what might be coming and with what the community might want from Lake Point, we are going to apply for a conservation futures grant, which is due on February 12th to kind of hold our spot in line on potential, keyword potential, acquisition of the shoreline area around there and where that shoreline buffer is. So again, it's kind of getting a little bit ahead, but we're just putting in the application to hold our spot in line, so to speak, in case there is community support for moving forward.
Okay. Deborah.
Yeah, kind of tagging along to what Mayor and Deputy Mayor said. I think this, really fits well with the Love Where You Live project, and I'm really excited about the community engagement pieces that are coming up around that. I mean, there's been a lot of work that's already happened around that as well, but I think the icing on the cake over the next few months on that project, I think will be fantastic. Really, I think a big goal for me in 2024 and thinking about this year is re-engaging our community in really positive ways.
Okay. Other thoughts for 2024? As you look down the road. Ethan.
I think something to consider and maybe look at as we move ahead, especially with opportunities from the ULI coming in and everything, is creating a heart for Kenmore, or the heart of Kenmore. Whether that's a central downtown right here that things sort of revolve around and give community space to, or whether that is Lake Point. I think that would be something to really explore, but creating that heart of Kenmore. When somebody says, I'm gonna go to downtown Kenmore, the heart of Kenmore, where is that they're referring to? Giving that meaning to the community.
Okay, Melanie.
I just want to echo that as well. And I know that, it's coming up, but the economic development plan for downtown is incredibly important, I think, not only to us, but our community. And so that will be a wonderful thing to see. Yeah.
Other thoughts about 2024? Valerie?
Thank you. I just think everything that everyone said is fantastic. So I'm right on board with all of that. But I also just want to say that I think as we're looking for economic development opportunities, we're also looking towards mixed use buildings. And so some of our proposed housing stock growth will also give ground floor opportunities for there to be business. And I'm very much looking forward to that.
Okay, great. Other thoughts? Joe, what do you see in 2024? I mean,
Massive progress on getting a public pool for Kenmore with buy-in from at least 3 jurisdictions that can all do it for cheaper if they work together.
right?
People would love that. And then also if we're looking at increasing density, doing it, building on the great work that our planning commission did a couple years ago now, I think it was, in putting density in the right place where it makes sense. And if we're gonna have a bigger city or increase density and population, to put in the things a big city needs, like infrastructure, like sidewalks, and protecting the environment in every aspect of that.
Okay. Other thoughts about 2024? Melanie?
I'm excited about the environmental services work that's ahead and the culverts and the work that we're moving forward with there. And I like the tie-in with Lake Point that we're looking at the environmental impacts as an opening into Lake Point as well. But I'm very excited about the direction we're going with the implementation of the climate action plan and habitat restoration. So thank you.
Okay. Nathan?
Flushing out something Joe said that reminded me of something I was thinking of was continuing to build on pedestrian and bicycle infrastructures, improve pedestrian and bicyclist safety throughout the city, create a more walkable community. I think right now, realistically, continuing on that, but I think idealistically crossing that finish line when we have from one end of the city to the other facilities that that make it safe to walk and bike.
Well, as you know, as a bicycle rider, I come here a couple times a year and ride the Burke and so on. So it's one of the great opportunities. And I'm just hoping that the brewery district expands a little bit. Other thoughts about 2024? There may be things coming at you from outside your city as well. I don't know if you're looking at across the water or the country or what have you. It's a moment to say what is 2024 going to shape up to be. Doing things or having things done to you. I know it's always a blend. Melanie?
Yeah, as you're saying that, I think, and I'm going to echo on, I think several of us, but I think Deborah really said it strongly about the importance of community engagement and really ensuring that our community knows there's space here, like that we are working together and that there's hope here. Kind of for where's the fun? The good that we do in this community, I really want to see our city continue with the wonderful activities. Our 25th anniversary celebration was a wonderful hit. Year before, our bridge celebration, but the celebrations and things that bring us together and the expanded town halls and other things. I think with what you brought up, because I think you brought up a really serious thing. We have major things happening worldwide and nationwide. How can we hold on to ourselves here and maintain the positive? And I think that we have a city that's very special. Our community residents are passionate, our staff and our council. And I think we can build on the good here. So thank you.
Rob?
Well, we're a little ahead of schedule. Do you mind if you open up that same question to the coworkers here, see what they're looking forward to?
That'd be great. Okay. From your seat in the world and certainly the context, which you heard a little bit earlier of your work here and so on, what do you see happening in 2024, one way or the other? John?
I'm looking forward to having a good sustainable budget.
Okay. Good.
I
Other
will agree.
thoughts?
I agree with John.
Okay, then this is a budget year for you guys, right? This is, yeah, so, all right. What else?
I'm excited about all our upcoming events for this coming year and our farmers market.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, again, as an outside person who watches and pays attention to your city, I mean, one of the great things about your city is that all the events that you have and activities and so on. I mean, it's just grown over the years. It's a fun place to be. It seems like that. I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later in the retreat, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on every community in this country to pull apart in 2024. And I think it's going to really be important for local leaders to figure out the antidote to that. And one of the reasons I love working with municipal governments is that you decide on things, and a year or two later, if I have the blessing to come back and work with you again, you've done it. And you are the forum for bringing people together more than any other government forum that we have. And so I admire you, and I'm wishing you the best in 24, because it's going to be out there for you. So other thoughts, staff?
Hank Aaron mascot costume brought to you by Suzanne Greathouse and the Kenmore Heritage Society. I'm looking forward to Hank hanging around with us.
Melanie?
I'm not staff, but I'm really excited about the tier 2 tree ordinance getting done in the next month or so. So that's pretty exciting.
I was just about to say that.
My apologies.
Good. Okay.
I can, so you guys have probably heard me say this before, but I've worked for mainly three cities in my career, and the first one, so every city has its great mystery, its great unsolvable mystery. And that first city, it was, why is the sign code always under review? And we could never solve that mystery. And then my next city, it was, why is the view ordinance always under review? And here in Kenmore is, why is the tree ordinance always under review? And you know what? We might actually be able to solve that mystery this year.
All right. Look forward to that.
I always thought Lake Point was our big mystery here, Rob.
Okay. Anything else as you think about the year that's coming up? Vigorous work plan, stuff you've heard, stuff you know is coming. Any other thoughts that you have?
I would echo the Hank Aaron. Very excited about Hank being present in the community. And I'm excited about the Climate Action Citizen Advisory Committee and the Housing and Human Services version of that will be coming, and just some of the other engagement we're doing with our community.
Okay. Anything else? Richard?
Well, I don't know why Jen isn't jumping up and down, but I hope that she and I have a final design for the Public Works Operations Center for you before the end of the year that is on budget and everyone's happy with, so that we can get our crews in a facility that they deserve.
I was going to leave that for last, so we could highlight it, end on a exciting note.
All right. Anything else? Nathan?
I know we're talking about all this new flashy stuff, but can I say, just continuing on with the good work that we're doing? I think there's a lot of good things that the city's doing, from public safety to permit review and things like that, from touches all different departments. So just keeping the good stuff here too. I think it's important not to lose sight of that.
Well said, because I think you have goals that you work on, and initiatives that draw your attention. But day to day and always, you're delivering a number of vital services. And often get asked, well, why don't we have goals for every part of the city? And part of the answer to that question is, well, typically cities are in some era of their life. So they're going somewhere at that point in time and they're doing certain things, but they've never stopped providing those basic services. And sometimes we don't, it's not that you don't recognize it, it's just that when you're heavily focused on these things, you know, you don't see that as much until, yeah, so it's well said. Yeah. Other thoughts before we move on? Anything else from staff? Okay. 5:55, must be break time. So we're a little bit ahead of our schedule, which always makes the facilitator happy. Before we go into the next content area, though, I want to quickly turn to Stephanie, and she has a quick thing she wanted to say that I think is pretty cool.
So we have an expanded leadership team at the city of Kenmore that it was launched last year. And we have some of the members of that group here with us tonight, either watching or in person. And so I just wanted to acknowledge this group. And what we're doing with the expanded leadership team is we're working with this group of up-and-comer talented people on our team, helping them have exposure to lots of different aspects of the organization outside of their departments. And it's a really fabulous group of employees. And they were all invited to come and watch the retreat, and then we'll talk about it afterwards and look at the materials and have more visibility to the council. So I just wanted to share with you all that they're here. Some of them are here behind me at the table and some are online, and just really thrilled about this group. They'll be joining the leadership team once a quarter, and that'll be part of their work as well as things like this tonight.
Great, welcome. Okay, moving to our 610 module, which we've already started. I'm going to turn to Rob. You'll see their polarity thinking. This, of course, will be familiar to some of us. But Rob thought it would be a good thing to do to bring this up back and start out 224 with a refresher for some and an introduction for others. So I'll give this to Rob.
All right. So yes, we did cover this at the June retreat. It was that day one of the on June 30th of the retreat. And I was preparing my comments for this and trying to refresh my memory. And I said, well, wait, what did I say at the, what did I cover when I talked to the council about this in June? And I just thought my presentation was so amazing that I said, you know what, let's just play the YouTube video from that. So Michelle, take it away for about the next 6 minutes.
Okay, with that, back to our agenda and Rob. Yeah, so polarity thinking, or another term is polarity management. Polarity management. So what are polarities? Polarities are a natural phenomenon. They occur in our world. And what they are, it's not good versus evil. A polarity is actually two good things that seemingly compete or are seemingly mutually exclusive. But actually, they are two independent pairs that need each other over time. So if you read the article, you can kind of get an idea. But one example of a polarity is consistency versus flexibility. And how the two actually kind of meet each other. Another example is individual freedom versus collective cooperation. And the two may seem at odds, but actually if you imbalance one over the other, it hurts both. So those are two kind of obvious examples. Other examples are like in an organization, organizations are always trying to find the tension between centralizing versus decentralizing. Maybe in our organization, you want to be fiscally conservative, but what about going after big opportunities? And can you do both? If you're too fiscally conservative, maybe you miss out on the big opportunities. But if you emphasize this too much, then you hurt the finances. And if you hurt the finances, so both need each other, right? Another one is cost versus quality. And how do you find the balance there? So when it comes to polarities, there's some things to know about polarities. They're not solvable. They're not actually problems to solve. They're just ongoing. They're going to be there forever. That battle between consistency and flexibility, it's always going to be there. It's not a problem to solve. And they actually are interdependent over the long term. So those are some concepts with polarities. Now, there are problems to solve. So one example is tuberculosis. So in the city of Tacoma, they used to have a TB sanatorium right there in South Tacoma, kind of where by the Warren Mall is now. And that was a thing. You got TB, you went to that sanatorium. But eventually, over time, our country eradicated tuberculosis for the most part. And that sanatorium is now a Coca-Cola bottling plant. And so you can turn your sanatoriums into Coca-Cola bottling plants. So an example of a problem to solve versus a polarity is pedestrian and bicycle safety at your target zero goal. That is a problem to solve. And that has a finite endpoint, right? Another one is drug addiction, homelessness. Those are problems to solve. Those are not polarities. Now you might find polarities when you're trying to solve those problems, but they're actually things that you can have a vision that, yes, we will have an endpoint with those things. So that's something I want you to think about when you're making your policy decisions. Is one of the first questions you can ask is, and you can even like put this in your drawer at your dais.
Did you put it in your drawer?
But is it a problem to solve, or is it a polarity to leverage? Okay. Or a polarity to
I mean, it is first. You've got two things that are in tension. But I liked his language of what happens when you overvalue one versus,
right.
And what happens when you overvalue the other. I thought that was I'm trying not to say first. I thought that was a helpful way to talk about the things that are in tension with each other. And that's a perfect example, I think, is, trees and environment versus development. I mean, that is, something that is at the forefront of our top two goals. And it, has been with us as a major policy balancing act. And then of course, another one is always, budget versus anything. It's sort of like, those are both, whatever the thing is, it's always super important, and our financial health is always super important. So how do you reconcile? How do you balance those and try to find, what I found was challenging though, is how do you find that interdependence? And I kind of struggled with that. So I'm open to how do we get there in our discussions. So I think.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, for that. So one of the most basic examples of a polarity is breathing. Inhaling and exhaling. You can't have one without the other, and they both need each other. And so there's so many polarities out there that what Barry Johnson, the guy who kind of coined this term, he says that polarities are a gift of nature, a natural phenomenon. And so rather letting polarities tie us up and, stymie us, they can actually be used as something to benefit our discussions and get us more into a yes and type of mentality instead of an either or win-lose mentality. So with that, any thoughts, questions, ideas that came out of that?
I had a question. Does this model speak to how one carries these opposites, if you will, maybe that's the wrong word, at the same time? I think there's a lot of pressure to line up, to kind of get consistent in your thinking. And there's, cognitive psychology is all about that. So it's like whenever you're inconsistent in your thinking, and I think more so than ever, I see that pressure on policymakers today, where it's like, and rarely does a policy not touch a number of different areas, right? It's never right or wrong or good or bad or what have you. So you're left with this sort of strange place where you're having to reconcile competing, if not conflicting, concepts. And I just wondered if that, if, you know, the people that were, that advanced this had spoken to that or kind of what people's thoughts are about that, I guess, because you live that in some respects, so.
You know, and it's this concept of being able to hold two competing ideas in your head at the same time. And being okay with that. And as policymakers, I think you're put in that position quite a bit.
Deborah?
Yes. Yeah, I think particularly, well, all the time, but, you know, I would be open to how do you do that in your own head? And if you can do that in your own head, how do you convey that? And, you know, again, you know, constantly thinking about community, you know, how do you bring community into your head, you know, into the challenges, and that because you think one way about one topic, it doesn't paint you as a good or bad person, or the issue isn't good or bad in the whole, in the main. It's, I've just struggled with that recently, so.
Right. Other thoughts about how you navigate? This is a reality. This isn't fiction. This is our world. So, Melanie.
I think I would just connect with what Deborah was talking about and the importance, you know, here in our, you know, we're representatives of our community. And we're also living in a world that's conditioning us to very polarized thinking, right? So how do we, you know, I guess as we are communicating with our community or each other to I think it's I was I was dialing into this conversation in a different way and how important it is for us to give consideration how we reach out to our community. We're not always going to agree on everything, but demonstrating that we're listening, where people are heard, that they're valued.
Right.
They're valued. And, you know, I think this is a really important conversation. And you know, we each have a responsibility to look at the breadth of the story and see the humanity of people bringing forward their ideas or concerns or dreams, right? There are people who have dreams of what the city can look like. There are people who are really angry about a few things, and how we can kind of bring that together into, well, all of our perspectives matter to help making this the beautiful place we want it to be. And so Deborah, I thought you brought up a really important thing. And honestly, we just went through probably one of the biggest challenges this council's ever been through in 25 years, would be my guess. For us to be able to look at that as a way of framing how we move forward.
Okay, other thoughts? Valerie.
Yeah, the thing that most strikes me is that this is a dynamic phenomenon. This is not something that is ever still. You breathe in, you breathe out. There's that concept of still point, which is the moment right between when you do the one and the other, that tension right between. And I'm just wondering, as a point of curiosity, whether good policy city level or trying to capture that still point between, or if it's trying to create an envelope that's large enough to hold the whole polarity. I don't know the answer to that. I'm a newbie, so. I'm curious.
Nathan.
Something that kind of crossed my mind, especially with that example between housing and the environment, is I think that this whole polarity discussion is, you know, somewhat two-dimensional. It's one or the other, and you have to find a way in the middle. And it's like Valerie said, it's not static. You're moving back and forth. But I think also there's the possibility it could be three-dimensional, and you can come up from that. And how do you actually fulfill both at the same time through maybe sustainable development housing units, which in fact may be better for the environment than what's existing, and that way you meet your housing needs, but also you've improved and added value to the environmental aspect of that, when concentrating density preserves more land elsewhere, and looking at it in that perspective of absolute gains instead of relative gains, I think, in that regard. And so that was just sort of my takeaway from this, is that there's sometimes more dimensions to the discussion and looking at it from a different way.
I think the challenge is that much of our world pushes us to dichotomous thinking. Yes, no, left, right, what have you. And in reality, the policy issues that face you are rarely that simple at all. And so one, I think, important bridge is listening to one another, because even though I may not think I either understand or agree with your perspective, another person's perspective is rarely without merit. So understanding that merit, and then, but in the end, you end up having to make choices, and it's usually I'm for it or I'm against it, and it's a systemized moment that's not consistent with the actual policy environment that you're actually working in. So I'm sure you feel that. You're welcome, John. It's good to see you.
Hello, good to be here.
Great. Other thoughts about polarity thinking as it was presented for some of you at remember the last retreat, this little blurb, other thoughts you might have as you start your 2024 policy journey?
So I would just encourage you to, when you're struggling with various policy issues, just ask yourself, is there a polarity somewhere in this that we need to manage, or is it a problem to solve? That's one question you can ask yourself when you're struggling with these issues. And if it's a polarity, finding that balance, trying not to overvalue one at the expense of the other, because if it's a true polarity, doing so, overvaluing one, hurts both.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else on this? Okay. Moving to the next topic, council norms and working agreements. In a minute, I'm going to give Nigel an opportunity to talk a little bit, I think, about, because he had an interest in having this on the agenda. But before that, I would say that a couple things. One, council norms in the Puget Sound area might actually have been invented by the Kenmore City Council. Yeah, I actually went back many years and found a retreat report where the Kenmore City Council sat down and worked out working agreements, how they wanted to proceed in different areas together. And I think in some respects that may be what we talk or do here about and do here in this module. So you've been provided a couple of things. One is the St. Louis Park, Minnesota City Council norms, and that's what I'm going to have Nigel speak just a moment on that. And then the other material you've been provided is kind of a collection. I used to collect these over time, and I just kind of stopped after a while. But I provided them of different council agreements from a variety of different councils over a period of time in different areas that they talked about. They agreed they do these things, and they did that because they felt it would enable them to move through their year and discuss complex issues and be passionate about it and come out the other end with good policy and not lose their relationships with one another, to be honest with you. That was really why they did it. Some of these things, and for some councils, were, I guess, codified into council rules. But for the majority of councils, these were just agreements. This is kind of how we be and what we do and so on. And it gets to the heart of a norm. A norm is essentially a way to be that creates some expectation, some guidelines of how we proceed in areas that are complex and what have you. And we have these in our lives. You might know about them, you might not. But all of you, particularly when you're new for the first time, you're answering a question how does this work? How do we talk to each other? How is that? And right away, you're handed council rules and so on. But the real meat of the answers to those questions is how are we with each other? You know, and who talks to who, when, and all of that. I think Nigel might have been, and I think he was introduced to these in another way, in another place. And I guess I'd turn to you, Nigel, and kind of give us a little idea of what happened there and why you found that interesting.
Yeah, so when I was in Atlanta for the National League of Cities Conference in November, there's a class I took about, I can't remember the exact topic, but I think it might have been council staff relations or something like that. But the presenter was the mayor of St. Louis Park in Minnesota. And he also has a consulting business. I think he does a lot of kind of what Michael does actually. And he was talking about council norms, and a light went off for me because I couldn't figure out what we were missing as a council for the last few years. But I think, you know, when I came on council, there's a lot of kind of unsaid norms and how we operated, and there's the council rules, but like, we didn't have things written down. We didn't actually have an agreement on how we were going to operate. We had kind of how it's been done by previous councils. I didn't find out until I talked with Michael that there actually had been norms at some point, like in 2000, way before my time. And from talking to Michael, I just thought that, you know, this might be a good opportunity, especially with, you know, 3 new council members, to kind of figure out what our norms are going to be. And the things in here are just suggestions and what other folks have done. I certainly don't agree with all the things that are laid out in here, but they're just things to get people thinking about, you know, how do we want to interact with each other? What are our expectations when we're working together? What are expectations during council during council meetings in public, kind of just to make sure that we can continue working together in a positive way. Not everything has to be a council rule. But I think we do need some basic understandings of kind of how we do things, and maybe codify those, not codify them, but just, you know, put them together in a document that we can all say, yeah, we agree to that. Because I really think it's important that we're able to work together in a positive way, even when we have disagreements or even when we're dealing with a tough issue, that we have kind of a basis for how we work together, because after an issue's done, we have to keep working together for, you know, as long as we're here. So that's why I brought this up.
Okay. Hey, Valerie.
Curious what became of the Kenmore council norms from the past. Is it sounds pre-internet, so maybe they're not recoverable, but is that something we could bounce from and amend, or they're gone?
So I don't think they're gone. I think that the real question is, are they relevant? And they're not gone, because at least on one computer in this world, they still exist, and that's mine. And that's your report, and I'm sure they're in the archives here somewhere, but what have you. I think that the content of the agreements is only half of it. I think the process of getting to the agreement is really important. And the other piece of it is, and I was just looking at some of these just in terms of time, it's nice that they're timestamp relevant. I mean, that they're relevant for today. In one of them that I look at in here that I was, when I was going over this, that I kind of smiled at, and that was when, not just for you, but for a number of councils that did this, they really had heartburn about the relationship between individual council members and the media. It was like, oh my goodness, who's talking to who? Do I get surprised by picking up the paper and reading about so-and-so? And I have tons of stories about that where it was not good. And so they spent a lot of time, and you'll see some of those agreements in there saying, hey, let's agree not to do that. You know, if you have a problem with me, I don't want to read it in the paper. Come talk to me about that, you know, kind of things of that nature. I mentioned that one because now it's not the media, it's social media that's completely eclipsed that one. And you know, I look back, and some of the folks that had heartburn with it would love to, you know, to have that problem back today, right? So it has a time feel to it as well. And you know, even tonight, if you did nothing but identify 2 or 3 or 5, I don't, in any of these areas, I group these into areas that seem to make sense way back when I was collecting these. In some councils, courtesy is huge. So how you talk to each other at the dais and whether you use council person or whatever they spent time talking about that because they wanted that to happen. Probably for me, if I had to pick a section in the samples that I give you, it's really the one about how to disagree. That's the big one. It's how to do that in a statesperson sort of way. When I was doing the police thing, my coach told me, Michael, you can write a ticket or arrest somebody, but you don't have to be mean to them. You don't have to be harsh on them. You can vote no against different from one of your colleagues, but you don't have to hurt them in the process of doing that. I'm not saying you do that, but I have worked with councils that did or do that. So that was kind of the thought of it. And I would say to you tonight that if we wanted to spend a little time just throwing out some things that as you go forward, some of you are very experienced and have sat on this council, others are new, but we've all been in groups. You know what works for you. If you could get an agreement from your colleagues on something, what would it be? And what would you, Joe?
I have a respectfully somewhat of a dissenting view. And it would be a question, well, number one, I see some value in trying to get more of maybe some more procedural issues that we haven't spelled out yet. How do things get introduced to the agenda, et cetera, whatever else you're thinking procedurally. But then the question is how do these almost like codes of conduct, how does that differ from our existing council rules, which addresses to some extent relations with social media and stuff like that?
I would say these are a little bit more less codified. They're a little bit more, they're not rules, they're norms that we agree to. It's kind of a different thing. I think, I will say, looking through our council rules, and after Michael did send me over, I think the recruit report from 2000 that had what was passed back then, a lot of those did get folded into the council rules, and I'm not sure if that was a good move either, to be honest. A lot of the council norms from 2000 were folded into our current council rules over the years, apparently. I'm not sure if that was a good move. I think we can, a lot of the things in there aren't things that I would necessarily say fit into rules per se, but more just I don't know, a collegial agreement on how we kind of operate. I think there's a difference between those two things. One is very here are the steps for what we do here. And these are just hey, we're assuming good intentions. We're using titles when we're at the dais. We're, being respectful, that sort of thing, which I think sometimes it's good to actually say those things out loud and agree to them, because sometimes, especially in politics, especially nowadays, it's really easy to assume bad intentions for people. It's really easy to assume that, nobody at the dais is my enemy, nobody in the audience is my enemy, but it's pretty easy to get to an us versus them sort of mindset, and I think it's important that maybe it isn't, maybe folks don't want to do this, and that's totally fine too. I just thought it was worth having a discussion around, because like Michael said, I think the exercise is also part of what I kind of view it as kind of a team building exercise, frankly. We have a relatively new council. I kind of view it as kind of a team building exercise. With 3 new council members, we have half of a new council also. So we have an opportunity to kind of reset the culture a little bit and agree on how we're going to operate for the next 2 years together. So.
If it helps, a way to look at a norm is it's a pattern of behavior or something that's typically that you do that's expected. When you know about norms when someone violates them. That's when you know, oh, that's a norm for me because that didn't work for me. In addition to that, though, a lot of the protocol and procedural things that you do are mandated by state law, your rules, and so what have you. So you come to expect that. But there's other things that you expect as professionals from one another, I think, that help you be all you can be as you go forward. The no surprise rule, I think, was one that's been sort of endured over time that I always tell people, well, you always learn something for the first time. So, being surprised, you can choose to be surprised as well. So I think this would be an effort. If there are things you say, hey, if we could agree to this, it'd sure make things easier or better or more informative to the public or whatever it is, you know. Some of these things did lead to rules in other jurisdictions. Community comment, for example, setting a time limit, the nuance. I had a client down in the South Sound area that had tons of community participation on and on, so much so that they created kind of a protocol about organizing masses of people that would come regularly to their council meetings into groups so that they could get efficient testimony. But that evolved out of experience. That wasn't mandated by law or what have you. They said this is a way to do this so that we can hear from people and still get healthy public policy decisions at the end of it. So, you know, I would invite you to look at these, or just think, what would you think would be a great agreement to have that would, and the other thing that we did see also is between staff and councils over time. I'll give you an example of this. If you want great staff work and you know you're going to ask a question on something, give them a call a week ahead saying, I'm going to be asking a question about this, so that when the staff show up, they're ready to roll, right? So as opposed to blindsiding them. Well, a lot of that stuff just kind of came out of, man, that didn't work. Let's don't do that again. Or staff would say, hey, if you did this it would really help us serve you better in our particular role. So, yeah. So, any thoughts or anything you'd like to do this, Deborah?
Yeah, I mean, the two things that, well, I mean, I like a lot of this, particularly the last one, which doesn't have I don't know where it's from, but I like, maybe it was from us, I don't know. The sample, the city council working protocols. But two things that I really liked was the, you know, assuming good intentions, because as I was saying earlier, I think it's just awfully easy to, you know, internally and externally to say, oh, well, they felt that way, so they're, you know, bad, and they're gonna generalize that badness to other decisions. And so there's that. And then I have always talked about this no surprise. I actually really feel like that's important. So I'd love to have that in some shape or form in a norm. I mean, it isn't a rule, because, you know, you can't always be every single time, 100% of the time, 100% prepared. I mean, that just, you know, is unrealistic. But, you know, to the extent that you can, try to give, you know, staff a heads up if you have questions or concerns, and then they can address it and be prepared in the moment. And so, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about one or two. But on that latter one, I would turn to Rob a little bit, knowing that there's also sort of a tenet in city management for city managers is not to let his or her council be surprised by something that they pick up the paper on, or, you know. And the story I'm fond of telling is the city of Federal Way became a city of Federal Way because of just that thing. They were contracting with the King County Police Department, and King County Police Department arrested a woman or arrested a person that hijacked a woman and her kid out of a parking lot. And the way that council found out about it, and the city manager, was on the 5 o'clock news when Jim Montgomery got up there as sheriff and said, our sheriff department did this. That city was contracting with them, had that stuff all over the side of their cars, right? Something that you're familiar with. That was it. They did their own police department. So the surprise that, you know, city managers work really hard not to see you get surprised about stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways, staff, council staff, but also amongst each other. I think it's good for you to not surprise each other with things over the dais. You know, you might be thinking about something and processing something, but then if you spring it on the rest of the council and ask them to respond to it in that very moment, that can be challenging too. And so I think there's ways to give each other a heads up without violating the OPMA, of course.
Okay. But I don't want to lose, you've offered up a couple of areas that you thought would be worth discussing in terms of and I would ask your colleagues to respond at least to that. The first one is assuming good intentions in people's position. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you meant by that, Deborah? Is that like when you vote, or or how does that?
Yeah, vote or in discussion that, you know, I mean, I know that all 7 of us, all of us want what's best for the city. And the staff too. I mean, I know that of the staff as well. But I'm just saying that, you know, it's a unique experience on the dais. I'll just say that. You know, I hope that we can all, you know, recognize that and that recognize that everybody is trying their best and wants in their mind what is best for the city.
Any comments on that? Nathan?
I build off of that a little bit, just because I really agree with that. But understanding those intentions, I think also kind of leads the way into understanding that as one body, we respect and defend one another, both inside and outside of chambers. So you know, if I make or if say for instance, Melanie makes a vote or a decision that I don't like, you know, and somebody comes up to me to complain, I don't feel it would be proper, at least to allow that to happen or to encourage that in any way, but to stand up for my fellow council members because we are one body in our decision making. I know that that's kind of drifting off a little bit, but
No, that's fine. I think that's hard to do. At one level, that's easy to do. On the other level, it's hard. I think it's easier to do that because you know each other's people, and I think you believe. I think knowing that your colleagues are doing it's their intentions, how they see it, and what have you. But I think when you disagree on an issue, though, and some of these agreements speak to this, it's how you manage that disagreement. So do you then, and you'll see some of these in here that say, you know, once the council votes on something, that's city policy. So some of these agreements say, even though I don't agree with that vote, I'm going to support the city policy. The vote was taken. I'm moving on. You know, that's what it is. And takes an intellectual separation and even emotional separation for where you stood on that issue. If where you stood did not become city policy. So you have to be able to distinguish between sort of that piece that you're bringing up, Nathan, and then actually where you stood on that issue. That's hard. That's hard to do, I think, but I do.
I mean, personally, I would actually move away from some of those, some of the norms that might feel like they're constraining people's like First Amendment rights to talk about where they came from or why they voted. But I think, you know, we could have norms around how we do that, you know, make it about your position and why, you know, why you did what you did, and don't speak for other people on the council as to why they did what they did. Because that's not your job. You know, as always, and actually, I don't even think this is on here, but, you know, speak to the policy and not the people, you know. I mean, that's kind of an important thing with debate anyway. But I think it's also important after tough votes, so we talk about the policy and not the people who took different votes from us, you know.
Okay. Any other thoughts on assuming good intentions and just the distinction between where an individual is and the policy? Okay, John.
Yeah, I don't have all the words for this, but I liked how you were phrasing it about how to go about that disagreement. You know, don't suppress it, don't walk away from it necessarily, but engage with it. I mean, we've got some language that says we value disagreements, we value people kind of speaking their mind. That's building a bit on what Mayor Herbig said. So I don't have a proposal ready for it, but like I would love to hear us lean into that a little bit. And cards face up, like sometimes that's going to get uncomfortable. Disagreement can be uncomfortable sometimes. I think it's important to a vigorous discussion and making sure that, you know, we're speaking our authentic kind of transparent selves, that, you know, we sit with some of that. So that's all I got.
Okay. Comments on that?
I would say it is important for us to have rigorous debate, and I appreciate that Councilmember Culver brought that up. It's very important. And I think we've done a
pretty good job listening to each other over the years, because this is where, if we don't have rigorous debate, people are afraid of sharing their ideas or concerns about something. We might make a decision that we regret in the long run. So it's really important. And I would say that these are nonpartisan seats. And it's really important for us to listen, regardless of how we may personally feel politically, these are non-partisan seats. And we have to look at each other fairly, and people will make decisions based on what their best judgment is, and there's value. I think this came up earlier. I think it's really a lot of value to seeing another side of a debate. If it's all one-sided, you might miss something really important.
Right.
So I appreciate that Councilmember Culliver brought that up.
Right. I think the greatest policy teams I've worked with over the years really became dependent on each other's analytical niche, where you are in that and how you think about things. And so they almost couldn't move forward with a vote before they'd say, gee, I need to hear from Joe. I haven't heard from you yet on this. I really need, or they would depend on somebody because they knew they were a numbers person. What do you think about that? And you'll hit your stride when you finally get to that place, because, and then you'll also know that you're really looking at the ins and outs of the policy, which is, which defeats partisanship, because it becomes an intellectually honest exercise, this or that. So, okay. No surprise. Deborah brought that up, and what is, we had had example with the staff. I mean, that's been kind of a type in, Nigel.
Yeah, I mean, another example of no surprises is, if you're gonna pull something off like the consent agenda, let staff know ahead of time, and probably let the mayor know ahead of time, so that the staff is here to present on whatever the topic is.
I also think that if you're, projecting something or saying something or sticking to one side, flipping things last minute may also undermine some of that trust or understanding. If you vote on one policy one way, one day, and then the next day you vote the other way on the exact same thing. I understand that there's going to be difference in project to project, but if you, I guess, say or kind of project one position and then you flip on that, that might be something that kind of erodes some of the trust.
Joe, and then Melanie.
Oops, it's great observation, and yet we must have room to grow, to evolve, I think, as they say. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, of course, the great American visionary, I think he quoted himself, or I think it's a quote directly from him: "Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." So there's a balance.
No, I completely agree. I think what was coming to mind here was actually a recent example with the Seattle City Council, in which one of their Seattle City Council members had come out publicly and said, I'm going to vote this way, I'm going to vote this way, and promised everyone else. And then during the vote, he said no. And then he lost the trust of the rest of the city council members, because they thought that they had support and an understanding, and then it just wasn't there. But I agree with you that we must have room to grow and keep an open mind. It's finding that balance.
Okay, before I come, you're on the queue. I think there's some nuances in between this. I think that I would hope that everybody feels like that once you get information, you can change your mind on policy issues if information comes to you that causes that to happen. I think the defense against feeling blindsided or worse is you explain that. You go, you know what? Yesterday I felt like this, but between yesterday and now, this happened or this came to me, that's changed my mind. And that's why I'm doing it that way. And I think that then inoculates you in some respects in a reasonable way. Melanie.
Before she's got, did anybody see a polarity just now?
It's true. Yeah. Melanie.
I don't think I need to belabor the point, but I think it's been made, which is we have to vote our truths based on the information that we have at hand. And I think it's important. So I think that one of our biggest responsibilities is trusting ourselves and our decisions. And changing a vote is a major decision. You know, I would say that we have to have respect for each other for the things that get us to where we go. And at the end of the day, each of us are voting for what is at the highest, greatest good for public good for the city of Kenmore. And, you know, we might not always have the same perspective on that. We may have a perspective that we thought we were all on the right track and then suddenly have a light shined on and go, oh, I might have made a really big mistake supporting this. You know, so I respect each and every one of us for wherever we land with a decision, because we have to come from our truth. That's what we're voted here to do. And so I just want to say, I trust each of you to choose what's right for you. We are here individually elected by the people of Kenmore for our perspective.
Right.
And I think diversity of views and ability to analyze and make decisions is very important.
Nathan?
Just to clarify, because I completely agree with all of these points. But, you know, I guess making sure that there's no surprises about it. That's what we're getting at, no surprises. I think we got a little too far away from that. And it's like, you can't vote this way if you voted that way kind of thing. If you change your vote, you know, making it so it's not as much of a surprise. I know there's only so much that we can do when it comes to Open Public Meetings Act, but as long as you start to project that maybe a little bit beforehand, or I guess my sort of what I'm thinking is, you know, if you're showing this one hand and then you, it's not that, but I think it's just no
let's be
surprises.
honest, that does erode trust in any transaction in life. If I'm saying one thing and then I do another, regardless, I think that the burden would be on me in some way or another to first recognize, well, that's going to erode some trust. And then, you know, why am I doing that? In your world, I think that there's a lot of intervening factors. The process itself, if you're still in a fact-finding process, I've seen policymakers that don't tip their hand ever. They just don't. And you don't know where they're going to be. Others, it depends on the issue and what have you. I think the example you used is less, people were surprised because somebody said, I'm going to be this, and then they show up and they're that. That's hard. So, and that was a surprise. So, yeah. Other thoughts? Yes, Valerie. And then Rob.
As the person in the room who recently went from a yes vote to a no vote, I'm feeling sort of called in, and I'm wondering if people need me to explain why I did that.
No,
No,
it
that's not
wasn't
what
you
we're-
at all.
All right,
No.
thank you. I'm happy to, but.
I don't think that's what we were for right now.
Okay. Nathan, were you in the queue?
Yes, I had something I was going to say,
Okay.
and
Let
me come back to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
Rob?
I would also say that on a lot of issues, the issues are going to come before you in multiple meetings. Rarely do we bring something, especially something big, to you for the first time and expect you to vote on it that night. You'll often see something 5, 6, 7, 10 times before you actually have to vote on it. And it can be frustrating if in those public meetings, you're not telling us what you're thinking. And we need to know what you're thinking, what your concerns are. You don't have to tell us how you're going to vote, but tell us what problems you have with the proposals. What are non-starters for you? What are deal killers? When we're bringing forward issues, and I have no idea when the final vote comes, when I have no idea how it's going to go, that can be frustrating, because had we known 6 weeks earlier, 6 months earlier, what your concern was, we could have answered that or helped you work through it. So that's something that can be frustrating, is just not tipping your hand at all. You are more than welcome to tip your hands in public meetings. In fact, I would encourage you to, so that we know what's out, what concerns are out there, what needs to be addressed.
Okay. John and Nigel.
Yeah,
Nathan. Okay.
building on that, we've talked about the no staff surprises of we don't want to throw them a, fastball over the plate of a question that they hadn't heard before or something like that. I would just say, let's make sure to extend that too to partners. We obviously had a pretty big undertaking that went a very different direction over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks or so, depending on who you ask, something in that ballpark. By my estimation, from my side of the dais, they looked pretty surprised. They looked pretty stunned and disappointed, I guess.
And these were the partners, you say?
Correct.
Okay.
I think there were plenty of people who were that way. So yeah, no, I am glad to hear no surprises. In that instance, it seemed like a good 18 months, 2 years of just heck yes, big thumbs up until it suddenly was not. So yeah.
Nigel and then Deborah.
Yeah, Rob kind of stole what I was thinking, but, and I'm not even just talking about, Plymouth or anything like that. I've seen it happen a couple of times in the past too, where council members didn't raise their hand during conversation or something, like they had something who was niggling them and they didn't bring it up either in one-on-ones with Rob or when we were, having it in front of us. And then things get voted down, and that's, it's only happened once or twice, I think. But throws a real wrench in the, staff work when that happens, if they don't have a chance to adjust what they're proposing or whatever, like part of our job is to make sure that as things are coming before us, that we are being as upfront with kind of where we are on things so that staff can be responsive to the policy direction we want to go. And on some level, it is a little unfair to staff to, hide your hand, I think, the entire time and then kind of jump out of nowhere and vote from left field, like we have a lot of opportunity to give input. And I think I think it falls on all of us to make sure that we're giving that input to staff at every opportunity so we get the best product back to us.
Okay, Deborah?
Yeah, a couple of things. I sort of taking off from, Councilmember Culver and Mayor Herbig. I think, ask questions early and often, just, get the concerns out there. And, I think at the same time, it can happen that new information becomes available and we haven't asked the right questions early and often. And so, votes change, but I think if we can strive to think broadly, get community input early, then, we might be able to have our questions addressed or, earlier as well. So, but really being thoughtful and, getting concerns and questions out early.
Okay. Anything else on the surprise or no surprise idea? Anything staff you need from council on this, in this area at all?
Well, I hesitate to bring this up because I don't think it's a good idea, but I saw one city council back in the 90s, they were considering a no smoking ordinance. It was actually Puyallup. And they had I don't know, maybe more meetings, but the last 2 meetings were the second to the last meeting was a formal non-binding vote. So they were all required to say how they were going to vote. And then 2 weeks later or however long was the final vote. And that has its pros and its cons, but I just thought I would throw that out there.
Nigel?
Yeah, I mean, there are other cities right now that will operate kind of along the same thing where they'll take a vote and the vote is actually to put it on the consent agenda the next week or 2 weeks from then. And so the real vote is kind of what happened 2 weeks earlier. But if something isn't going to work out with it, then staff has time to maybe figure out how to make it work.
I think where I see that a lot is if staff really at some point on these big projects needs to know where the council is on things, because if there's not enough interest, you're getting ready to burn up a bunch of resources on something. I think you tend to do a good job on that, kind of back and forth, but there are moments, whether it's a non-binding vote or like, what say ye? Because this is fish or cut bait time, you know, we've got to, once we do this, it's going to be, so I don't know.
Yeah, and I think especially when you're in your quasi judicial role, obviously you can't talk about it outside of council meetings, but it's when you're in the council meeting, you can talk about it. And so that's when I encourage you to let us know early and often.
Okay. Melanie.
Sorry, this is a little bit hard for, I'm trying to decide how to frame this. But I think that, and maybe this isn't even in this, it may be outside this conversation, but maybe it's within it. You know, courtesy is contagious and our community voices matter. And I know that we as a city and our staff, I have been so impressed with outreach to our community. But even with a lot of outreach, sometimes people don't show up. I'm just going to say how important community voices are, because sometimes they'll shine a light on something that you didn't see before. You know, if we're not all sharing enough information about our concerns, like you know, we might not see something that might have been just so obvious. And so I just think it's really important that we recognize the caring and compassion of community members who might not always be in agreement with our decisions as well. You know, that we're all, you know, on that polarity thinking, respect for each other, respect for the places that we make decisions from. And really, we on the dais, we are directing staff. We are absolutely at the end of the day responsible for what we direct. So for me on Plymouth, I feel terrible that staff spent 18 months on something that at the end of the day, I had to vote against because something glaring that I couldn't see. I couldn't see it until the very end. And so, and I'm not blaming anyone but my responsibility here, but there's something about when I heard community voices, the lens made a difference for me. And I'm not here to defend that, but I'm just going to say it's really important for us on the dais to be as clear with our concerns as possible and not speak in code. Because I might not hear you. I like to think I can hear you, but sometimes I might not hear it if it's not explicit. So it's important for our community members to engage so that we can hear their perspectives. A breadth of community engagement is important, not just this. And I value all of our regulars, but you know, nuanced voices, new voices also help with us. But I just wanted to say for us, a norm is really bring forward your questions. My goal for this year is to come forward with way more questions. That's actually a goal of mine. I like to listen to other people's questions and observe and chime in, but I'm going to be coming forward with more questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Other comments, John?
I mean, not to put you two on the spot, Deputy Mayor, okay? But just for my own edification, hearing this reference to coded concerns or that sort of stuff, my brain then wants to decode that. Could you illuminate on that? Like what did that mean for you? I'm totally barking up the tree of a Plymouth debrief also, just to be absolutely clear on that.
I didn't understand your question. What were you asking?
Yeah, you had sort of said you'd encourage people not to be coded with their concerns when they raise them, if I'm getting your word choice right.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you could elaborate, like what what concerns did you hear that were coded? Or like, what was the revelation for you, I guess, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I don't have anything specific there. It's just sometimes, something, I really don't have a specific example, but if there's a concern, sometimes we want to be really respectful, and I think we live in a time where language, we have to, I don't know, it's just hearing concerns matters. None of us had any concern. I mean, I'm not going backwards. I'm just saying, I encourage us to be brave with questions, and maybe I'm talking to myself to be more brave with questions. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments? What are some other ways to be that, you can point out ways that have been working for you. You don't have to look at things that are, you wish, but or things that you think you've found be very helpful over your time on the council, or if you're new and you would like something that would be helpful to make use of. Joe.
I think thus far, this council this year has managed great economy of speech.
I'm sorry, I missed.
This council has demonstrated great economy of speech.
Okay. Valerie?
I just want to take a minute and credit Mayor Herbig with giving me the best piece of advice I've had thus far coming to council, which is just, as we've already said, to remember that everyone who speaks before us is participating because they care about our city. That has been very helpful to me, and I just want to say thank you.
Anything else that you would see that would be helpful? Nathan?
Well, there's a few things, and single words, but I think being gracious and how we speak to one another and to staff, being respectful with how we speak to one another, staff, the community, partners, whoever else it may be, being positive and professional. That those are very important.
Maybe zooming in too hard on the Plymouth example, but I think in this instance, this was a case where having more of that forcing function forced us to think through things like, oh, we got to put a development agreement together. What is that going to entail? Like, forces us to not just like, yeah, that sounds good. Like, cool. What does that look like when rubber meets road? What do we mean by that? I don't love that the suggestion there is basically like spoon feed more, whether it's deadlines or legal agreements or whatever, but I think that might have been helpful also. We did not have a purchase and sale agreement with the Plymouth agreement. So it was sort of foregone, like, we don't need this. We know we're on board. It's fine. But that might have helped potentially along the way, at least helping everyone sort of recognize the gravity of those thumbs ups. So, yeah.
Okay, Nathan?
I think it's good to be careful when, or maybe just don't make assumptions. I think that's for the benefit of new council members, for the community, for one another. If we assume that everybody's on the same page, they might not be. So just not to make assumptions and as we proceed with business.
Other thoughts? Are there other agreements or norms that you would see either on this roster or you've thought for some time, gee, if we did it this way or stopped doing it that way, it might be, Deborah?
I don't know if this is a norm, but I don't think it's in our rules and I don't see it represented here, but I think messaging and assuming that, clearly communicating that, staff are working on behalf of the council. So they don't have separate agenda. We're all in this together. And, I think that's pretty important. And I think, the buck stops here. And so, I'm just gonna say, bluntly, I guess the norm is we don't throw people under the bus if we can avoid it. That goes for each other too, but yeah. leave it at that.
Well, you're working in a complex world with a lot of stuff and process and so on. So I'm amazed at how much success municipal governments have, and they have a lot, actually. Nigel?
Yeah, you mentioned something along those lines earlier, and I think that what we have in the council rules might be a little too draconian on it. But, I think notifying folks of, hey, I'm doing an interview on, I got called by the Times and they're asking me about X, just letting people know, hey, I'm doing this interview, don't know when it'll be out, but just want to let you know I spoke with them. It's just a nice courtesy, I think, for everybody, so that we don't just, again, get a Google alert and go, oh, what's this? Oh, that's, didn't know that was coming. Because I think that is kind of helpful just to everybody to know, hey, there might be a news story about this thing coming up. I try to do that when I get, if I do an interview, but, and I think our council rules, it actually talks about letters to the editor. That's how dated our council rules are. Because we know how important letters to the editor are.
I think that in the city manager form of government, the mayor always is wondering, am I serving you, my council members, the way you want me to do that? And I think over time, you've developed relationships so you can communicate that in such a way as this, and you'll see a couple of these agreements over time, different councils that I worked with would specifically speak to their mayor through this process on how they'd like to see things happen and so on and so forth. Totally appropriate. I think the challenge that a mayor has in this form of government is that practically they often are the spokesperson for the council. So a lot of the agreements focus on speaking for the council, speaking on past policy, distinguishing my personal point of view from the council's, and all. You'll see a lot of agreements in those particular areas. I haven't seen you get snagged up in that very much, if at all. The subtle thing that Nigel raises is that if either any of you are approached by a major media outlet, there's two things that's in play. They want your opinion, but they're doing a story on something. So what's that all about? And they don't always ask you the questions that's telling you the full flavor of where they're going with that story. And I think sharing that is happening might be a good thing for your city and your body overall. So.
Let's see. Oh, Mayor, you mentioned a council norm that you didn't know when you were first on the council, and that is how important the retreat is. And that's actually kind of a council norm because that's when the council sets its priorities. Do you want to speak to that at all?
No, I mean, yeah, when I first joined council, the first meetings that we had, at the time we did our big retreat in January, and the first big meetings that I had outside of, I think maybe one council meeting, was the two-day retreat out in LaConner. And, I walked into that meeting, I didn't realize that we were, setting the goals for the year and redoing our council priorities and introducing new kind of, if we had initiatives we wanted to introduce. We used to do that at the beginning of the year, and we ran into some issues where we were rejiggering the council priorities right after we had just passed a budget based on the priorities we had in place. And we were introducing new council initiatives that weren't funded by the budget that had just been passed. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect between those two things. It made a lot of sense intuitively to do council priorities at the beginning of the year, just from a calendar standpoint, and especially with new council members starting in. But it really did lead to a bit of a disconnect between the previous budget that was already locked in and then what we were doing the rest of that calendar year. And all of that also feeds into the city manager evaluation and everything else. So a couple of years ago, we did move things around. We moved we used to have a shorter kind of half-day budget focused retreat mid-year. We moved that to what we're doing now. And we moved the longer two-day retreat to June, in the hopes that, we can redo the priorities for the following calendar year. And that gives staff kind of a starting point for what the council wants to do. Like when we do this in April, May, that gives the staff kind of a compass point for what the council wants to do in 2025, and it helps them when they're laying out then the budget for 2025. And it also gives us more runway when it comes to like new council initiatives to make sure that they're going to be funded in the upcoming budget, because it was frustrating when you introduce a new council initiative and then nothing could happen with it for a year and a half because it wouldn't get funded until the next budget. And then it took 6 months for everything to get implemented, and, you know. So I do want to recognize that I realize it must be a little frustrating to be a new council member and to have to wait a little bit, and I apologize for that. I've been there and I feel it. But that is what we'll be doing in April, May, and I do hope people will come prepared for that, because we'll have a vigorous discussion around all of that. And Michael's been facilitating those things going back to, I don't know, the Stone Age. So he's got it down to a bit of a science.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm glad you raised that, because if sitting council members know that process, so they know that's one of the major venues for getting initiatives up and discussed. New folks might not know that exactly as much, and so it's important to mention that. I think there are other processes that you go through during the year that begin to shape the future. And if I'm sitting in your chair, even whether I'm experienced or new, I would constantly be asking myself, how is it that I'm going to get the things I hope can happen for Kenmore accomplished? And you know, the transition that we did talk about when you move from getting elected to then moving, cast your gaze internally in terms of the processes for getting things accomplished. That's a bit of a transition, and often you don't get a lot of help or heads up with that. You know, you realize that's, and suddenly you're one amongst seven. You're not just one, and it is as obvious as that sounds. I've watched people struggle with that over time because they're still, and so these processes help with that, I think. The other thing that I've seen over time that might be valuable to mention is that I've watched many policymakers have things that they want to have happen, and they get to the goal setting session and so on, and their goal doesn't make it to the top or doesn't even get it. And it's somewhat of a discouraging thing. But then I watch them persist, and then it is. And I look at, there's one that's ongoing right now, swimming pool, I think is an example of a policy initiative started, and then there it goes. Sidewalks is a famous story here in Kenmore as well of that kind of thing. So, and as much as you're coming into existing resource profile, much of which has been expended. You heard that today, or you're moving forward on stuff. So the room, the capacity for new stuff is limited on day one when you come in. But miraculously over time, I watched the resource portfolio open up, and swimming pools or something like that happens, and the sidewalks are happening. And it starts at this, like now, and then that retreat, and then there it goes. So it's been fun and very satisfying to watch that. So I think it's a good, I want to encourage people to see the process and their vision for Kenmore in these processes, because it has and will happen for you, I think. Other norms, anything that you're thinking that's nagged at you, that's maybe, God, we wish we'd do it that way, or gee, this has been working really well, hope we don't stop doing that. I mean, staff as well. Nathan, and then John.
So I don't think I'll be contributing a new norm here, but I did want to add some clarification when it came to disagreement, having the understanding that, you know, maybe your biggest opponent on this item may be your biggest proponent or ally on the next one. Just having that understanding that disagreement should end with each topic.
John?
I would just bookmark. I hope we could take this up at the bigger retreat later, because I would love to tackle this with a little more experience, I guess, as we continue to congeal and such. So yeah.
I mean, I would even say Councilmember Lutz said maybe we don't even talk about opponents. We're not opponents on these things. We're partners and may have disagreements on things and we move on to the next thing. But
Sorry, I didn't mean it like that.
no. I totally get what you're saying. You know, it's like I worked for somebody years ago who was in the state Senate, and he said, "Oh yeah, the Republicans in the Senate, they're our opponent. The House is the enemy." And I thought that was a really weird way of putting it. But on a body this big, there's no room for enemies, really, I don't think.
Okay. Anything else on this one? Rob? This is back to council priorities. So, you know, you have this list of council priorities ranked in order. There are a lot of things we do that don't make it on there because they go without saying they're so important. Like investigating crimes and taking care of our roads and like that. And sometimes we can get so focused on the council priorities that I don't know if forget's the right word, but I don't know. I'm just thinking that I would love a statement like right above council priorities that says city's #1 goal is to take care of its core and basic services in a cost-efficient and sustainable manner, period. That's the #1 goal. And then in addition, we have some priorities that we'd like to tackle.
Thoughts on that one? Valerie, and then Nathan.
Yeah, I feel like our time with Jennifer this week reminded all of us that maintenance is key. You know, new initiatives are fun and sexy and amazing and funded, but really the core of the functioning city, as Rob has just said, is to maintain what we have. So I just want to thank you, reiterate that.
Nathan.
I was just gonna say a second what Rob said.
Yeah. There you go, yeah. Okay. Any other, Valerie?
This is really just a question. Were we hoping to come away from this evening with some written council norms, or is this just a discussion?
You know, I didn't come out with a clear picture on that. I talked with Mike a little bit and he talked about the process and how that was important. And I wasn't sure what Michael's process was going to look like for this. So, and I don't totally disagree with Councilmember Culver's idea that maybe this is a starting off point when we have a deeper discussion about this in April, May, when we have a little bit more time to let things breathe a bit. And you all have more experience, you know, sitting on the dais.
Rob?
What I recommend is 2 or 3 of you form a little subcommittee and come up with a list of norms that you can react to at your retreat. I think that would speed up the conversation if you actually had a proposed list of norms.
And this discussion wasn't lost. I mean, I'm taking notes and Anastasia and we talked prior to, and I'm always, I think the initial conversation, the distinction between rules and agreements, and they are different. They can be compatible, hopefully, but they can be different. So it was a soft push, not a hard push. I'm real product oriented, so I'm with you. But on the other hand, I think this is for you, and this could set the stage for something, and that's a good idea if you're wanting to do that. So.
Or like maybe just the mayor and I can work on it if nobody else is interested.
I'll self-nominate.
Okay, we can go work on something.
Okay.
Michael, can you send me your notes?
All right.
Thanks.
I'm happy to share everything I have. So, Joe.
Yeah, I'm not interested in, to let you know upfront and earlier, et cetera, I'm not interested in any aspect of the new proposed norms, except insofar as they're procedural. Like, here's some way we're going to introduce an idea, or here's how we're going to do something like that. I think we got it covered by the rules. I think they're good goals and good morals to have and to talk about and to reiterate, but I don't think they ought to be codified. I would be afraid that they could be used against somebody.
Nigel.
I'd just like to point out, Councilmember Marshall just very well used the no surprise norm that we were discussing earlier and spoke out with what he thought, and I really appreciate that. So.
Okay. I think the typical view of agreements is that they're not codified, if you will. They're just written down if it's helpful, but just an understandings that create some expectations of how to proceed. So I think if you want to develop those and then look at them for what they are, you can do that. But it's rare. The norm movement, if there was such a thing 20 years ago, many of them, as was noted when we started, have ended up as rules in many different councils because they didn't really have those things there, and time and life goes on. So, and as does the law, which has informed many of these things now. So, okay. Anything else when it comes to norms? How's the staff doing? This is your chance. You can get an agreement from these guys if you want. So, okay. Fired. I think there.
We nailed down the 2-day retreat date. So I think the city clerk checked in with you, and looks like all of you can do April 26th, 27th. All but one of you can do May 3rd, 4th. Is that right? Now, I know those 2 dates are only a week off, but I'm actually recommending May 3rd, 4th because the FSP task force is going to be finishing up its work and then giving a report to you. And I'd love for them to have that report before your retreat. And that 1 week, I think, could make a difference. So you're the one person that can't make May 3rd, 4th. Any flexibility there?
I'll see what I can make happen.
Okay, appreciate that. So if that's okay, if that works for him, is any other problems with May 3rd, 4th?
No, but I mean, could we have a deadline where we're locking it in? I mean, some of us are trying to make plans for that period with other people.
Councilmember Culver, when do you think you would know if it's?
I don't have an ETA, unfortunately, no. I chose when I was available, so.
I couldn't quite understand, so.
I don't have a definite date that I'll follow up by, but I'll see what I can make work.
Okay, so that information will be coming to you shortly, I hope. Okay, Nathan.
Quick question on that, because I know that the 3rd is the first Friday of the month. Would that conflict with our Seashore Transportation Forum meeting?
Likely, but I would argue it's not the end of the world to miss a Seashore meeting every once in a
Okay,
while. So.
all right, I just want to make sure, so.
And if Councilmember Culver can't make May 3rd, 4th, then we're going to default back to April 26th, 27th.
I mean, can we not look at like the week following 3rd, 4th?
Then I'm actually out of town. So, and that one's not flexible for me.
Okay. Oh, is it? Oh yeah, Mother's Day is the 12th. Okay. Oh, maybe we have to reopen Doodle Poll if we don't. Maybe we just aren't able to do as early as we were hoping.
And I'm okay with the 26th, 27th. I mean, I'll have an idea of what the task force is going to be proposing. But just that 1 week might make a good difference on how final their final proposal is.
Okay. I think we are adjourned. Thank you. Work evening, great seeing you all, 2024. Appreciate it. Yeah.
We are adjourned.
Oh, I like these folks. Yeah.